In today's tutorial, I am going to show you how to make this super fun shaped table topper. I absolutely love it, and it is worth the effort for all these outside and inside curves for binding. It's not the most beginner friendly project, so if you've never quilted before, this might not be where you want to start, but I promise I'm going to walk you through how to do this step by step so that you can be successful with it. So, who is ready to make a table topper? Let's get started. Here are the supplies we are going to use to make this table topper. I'm going to be using this square, which is one of the squares on the Happy at Home fabric panel from Riley Blake Designs. Then I'm going to be using this brown flower pattern for the 4 little triangle cutouts. Then I am going to do binding and the backing from the orange dot from the same collection, Happy at Home. We're going to need some pins, rotary cutter, ruler, some different threads for quilting this. I'm going to use the darker on the outside of this, quite a bit of white, and then I'm going to use this orange from Superior Threads because it goes really well with that fabric as the bobbin thread so that the stitching isn't going to show a lot on the back. Now, what I love about this table topper is you can do this with any 18-inch block. So you can use any 18-inch image from a fabric panel. You could just use a different piece of fabric. You could make an 18-inch quilt block, and all the rest of the directions are going to be exactly the same. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your panel square, and this is 18 by 18. Then I have already pre-cut 2 7.5-inch squares. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut each of these on the diagonal. Diagonal cut is going to be 10.5 inches. So you're going to fold the square in half and kind of finger press. The goal is to find the center so you can see that fold. Now we're going to take a triangle. We're going to line the raw edges up and we're going to put that point right on that fold so that we're sure that it is centered on here. And then we're going to pin that on and we're going to repeat for all 4 sides. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew each of these on with a 1/4 inch seam. We have the 4 points sewn on and pressed out, and now we are going to layer it with the backing, some batting, and the top, pin it together and quilt it. Now, because of this shape, it is going to be obviously a little trickier to put your binding on than a traditional rectangle or square, but I think we are going to find that it is worth it, and I'm going to walk you through each of the steps. So I'm going to put this aside for a second. We're using the orange dots. I'm going to put that down right side down. Then I'm going to add some batting. This is all obviously much bigger than I need. We're going to trim this up a little bit, but it's just easier to place down too big and get your topper on and then trim it, in my opinion anyway, than to trim it all early on. So make sure you get your batting nice and flat. And because the backing is non-directional, I'm just going to turn this sideways because I think it'll use a little bit less length if I do it this way. Now you want to make sure you have about 1 inch past your topper for your backing and your batting. So I need to pull that down a little bit. Okay, so I have that in place. Now before I pin it, I'm just going to scooch it across my table and I'm going to trim here because I have a lot of excess that I just need to get out of the way. Okay, now I'm going to grab my quilting pins. I'm going to pin this together and we're going to get ready to quilt. So I try and place my pins strategically so that I can leave them in while I do some of that stitching so that it holds all 3 layers in place and we don't get any buckling. I changed my bobbin thread to orange so that it's going to match my backing. And I'm going to start quilting with white since I already have the white thread in the top. And then to avoid any big knots on the bottom, you want to put your foot down, hold your thread, put your needle down, pull it back up. We're going to pull up that bobbin thread and we're going to hold both of these while we knot and before we begin to do our quilting. If you have a walking foot, that's going to give you better results because it's going to have a foot on top, moving the top fabric while your feed dogs underneath are going to be moving the bottoms. I've changed the top thread to coordinate with this color, and I'm going to be doing my quilting on the brown and also out on these floral triangles. The next thing I'm going to do, which I often actually do first, is I'm going to run a really wide, as long as my stitches will go, which I believe is 5. Just do a baste the outer edge just to make sure it all stays in shape. And then I'll do a little bit of quilting on these triangles. This is truly just to keep everything where you want it to be. This really makes you realize how many points we're going to have to deal with when we're adding our binding, but it's going to be worth it, I promise. So with most quilting projects, you just have to cut some straight edges once you get this all bound, all quilted together, and you're good to go. But of course, I was obsessed with the shape, so now we have lots of cutting lines to do. So you can either use scissors, but I was a little worried that it wouldn't end up as symmetrical as it's supposed to be. So we're going to very, very carefully use our rulers, a combination of our ruler, our rotary cutter, and scissors into these points, because we want to make sure we don't cut onto those little sections, but we also want to make sure that these two lines are even, that everything's evened out so it looks like two big squares put together and it looks super cool. So let's give it a go. I'm going to just really slowly use a rotary cutter until I'm almost there. Let's see how close I got. Actually, I got really close. That's going to work. And then I'm going to start with my blade, the tip there, and go forward. And now I'm just going to rotate the design and just keep going for each of these sections. So then I'm just going to take the scissors and cut that point. I'm so excited. It looks really good. Now, the part that is going to be the trickiest for binding is this inner corner. We know how to do outsides. We do those all the time. But this inner part is tricky, and we're going to do it in 2 steps. The first trick is we need to clip about 1/4 inch in this way. But I don't really trust myself to know exactly what that means. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler, and right on the back, I'm going to use a heat erasable pen. I'm going to draw a line 1/4 inch from each edge. So basically, that's where we're going to be sewing, right? When we are sewing on our binding, we're going to have the raw edge here, and we're going to sew along that line. So we want to clip not all the way to there, but just shy of it, like that, on each of these 4 inner, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8. Yikes. Okay. So we're going to do that for all 8 before we go to the sewing machine. Okay, now we have to do the binding. I think this is going to be enough, but we're going to find out together, and we can always add more if we realize it's going to come up a little bit short. I made binding out of 2 strips, 2.5 inches wide with the fabric. We're going to want to start on one of these outer triangles because this is a longer section to be putting the binding together at the end, other than these. So I'm going to do it on a bottom corner. So this is kind of where I'm going to start. Because I'm going to do machine binding, I'm going to sew it on the back, and then I'm going to flip it around and machine bind on the front. We're going to start with a tail. So we're going to start sewing right about there and leave a pretty good tail on there. So, well, let's see, about like that. So we have lots to work with when we are getting the binding front and back to go together. Now we're going to sew until we get 1/4 inch from this end. Just go really slow when you get close. We're going to pivot, and we're going to go at an angle off of that end. And now, like with other straight corner binding, we're going to put that up so that this raw edge is straight with the one we're going to do it. So you get a nice little triangle, and then we're going to fold it down so that the fold is even with this top edge that we just came off of. And we're just going to start and go straight. Then we're going to get to the tricky part. So now we're getting closer to this first inside angle where we did the snip, and see how we have those two lines. We basically are going to draw those same lines on top of the binding. So I'm going to put my ruler 1/4 inch from that raw edge, and I'm going to draw. And then I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to go 1/4 inch from this raw edge, and I'm going to draw. So this right here is our pivot point. I'm going to keep sewing until my needle is down in that point. So just go real slow when you get close. Now we're going to lift the foot. And this is going to feel weird and counterintuitive. We're going to pull the fabric, and this works because we clipped it so that it goes straight. See how we have now matched up, like that cut in there is opened up and this line is now straight. So I'm just going to hold that so it goes straight, and then we're going to come down here 1/4 inch from this end, and we're going to sew off the edge just like we did on our first corner. Okay, so you'll see when I picked it up, it goes back to being a point. And then a preview of what is to come. When we get all the way around, we're going to be turning and pressing this to the front. So it's not going to make a perfect pleat. It's just going to kind of ease into that curve, but it's going to work really well. And this is definitely the easiest way to go. So now we're just going to keep going all the way around and do all these zillion points on this table topper. We have one more inside point to bind, and then we're going to be attaching the bindings together. So what you're going to do is you're going to go down and you're going to do what you normally do. We really don't have a lot of room to get these bindings matched up and sewn together, but we are going to get it done. That's enough that is making that turn. So now we have all this, and we have this, and we have to get it all together. So to do this matching, we're going to take a piece of the end of our binding. We're just going to cut that straight across. We're going to open it up so that the fold is horizontal or perpendicular to our raw edge. So I'm going to put that down, and we're going to cut this piece right along this edge. This works great, but usually you have a longer run, so you can have more not sewn down to work with. But we're going to see what's going to happen. Now we're going to lay this flat down on top of this piece of fabric, and then we're going to lift the binding and that fabric so that the fabric doesn't move. And now we're going to cut this binding along that top edge. I cannot get this flat long enough to meet up with that. So I'm going to have to use my seam ripper and take out a little bit of the stitching and get closer to where that curve is. Don't go all the way to where this point is clipped. Just get a couple stitches from there, and let's see if that is going to give us enough ease. And I'm going to take some out on this side as well, going towards that corner. We just need more open binding to work with. And I could have edited this out, but I just want to show you how to pinch hit if you need to, because obviously we need to. So now I'm going to pin this back together because we know that we have these pieces of binding cut correctly. They're cut to the perfect length to put together. Now it's just a matter of being able to get it flat enough that we can put it together. Now the other thing, before you sew, I always like to pin it and just make sure I don't have it twisted. But if you do, that's what seam rippers are for. But this is my way of testing. It's not perfectly lined up, so we're not ready to sew, but we're just ready to test. So this is kind of where we're going to stitch. So I just want to do this and make sure that that's going to be correct. Okay, that is going to be correct. So now let's get it lined up really well. So this the cut edges are getting lined up with the opposite edges of the other side. And now I'm going to draw the line so we know exactly where that one starts. That one where we're going to be sewing. And then I'm just going to get this done. I'm not going to try and pin it because I'm too afraid of it shifting. So I'm just going to hold on both sides and get that sewn. All right, now before you trim, you always want to open it up and make sure neither of these is twisted. But we did check it, but always triple check. So we know that that worked. So now I'm going to open this up. I'm going to trim off this excess, about 1/4 inch from the stitching. Now I'm going to press that flat, press that, and come back and finish sewing the binding on. All right, so now I just have to sew from that stitching to that stitching. And the binding is on, and then we're going to press, flip it. We are almost done. Now, before we press this to the other side and stitch on the front to put it all together, we do want to clip the binding in these corners so that it has some give when it turns, but just make sure you don't hit the stitching. Do that on each of the internal points. So now I am ironing the binding towards the front. And you can, of course, do this in the opposite direction. You can sew onto the front, flip it, and hand bind or machine bind. But if you want to machine bind, you're often going to get a better finished look if you turn it towards the front. So this has so many little inside and outside. So it's lots of different mitered corners that we need to get going as we are stitching this together. So here is what I recommend. Do your squared mitered corners first. So this one, I'm going to do this one, I'm going to do this one, and then we'll do the ease in on these inner ones. So let's give it a try. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of practice. Usually if you fold that up so it looks like, almost like you're putting that binding on and then you fold it down, that's going to give you a really, see, it worked perfect. That's going to give you a really nice match on that mitered corner. But sometimes you have to manipulate it a little bit more. Happens to the best of us. So I'm just going to press that corner really well. Now I'm going to go up here and I'm going to do this one. So I'm going to fold that. So it's got a nice triangle there, and then I'm going to bring it down. And yay, it's all agreeing with me today. So now I have these 3 mitered corners lined up quite nicely. So now I'm just going to ease that down and press there and ease that down. I do love this new iron. I just got the Oliso or Olicio, I don't know how they pronounce it, where it pops right up. It's activated by touch. So when I touch it, it goes down. And when I let go, it pops back up. I don't have to keep tilting it. Took me a while to invest in that, but it was worth it. I love it. Okay, so we're just going to keep doing this all the way around. So here's what happens sometimes. See how that fold, it's just not working well. You just keep at it and try folding it different ways until you get a nice matched point, because that's going to matter. You're going to notice that. So it's worth trying it a couple times to get that to line up properly. This is a great project to practice binding and doing corners because boy, oh boy, are there a lot, but I think it's worth it. I love the shape. Okay, so we have that pressed all the way around. I'm going to grab my school glue. You want it to be washable. So you just always get these when they're on sale at the beginning of the year. And clips. I'm just going to run a bead of glue all around here and press that down, and I'm going to clip it. If you wanted to sew your binding right away, you could do the glue and then press it with no steam to dry the glue. I usually look at this as a great time to take a little break. This was a lot of work to get this binding on, get it pressed. So I'm just going to let the glue dry by itself, and I'm going to clip it. You don't want too much because you don't want it coming out from under the binding. Oops. To finish off the binding, now that the glue is all dried, you can take all these off at once, or you can just do it as you go. I'm going to, again, put my needle in, pull it up, pull that bobbin thread up so that I don't get a big snarl knot on the back side. And I'm just going to stitch all the way around really close on top of the binding, so it looks great from the top. And then I have the orange on the bottom, so it'll be a little bit past where this seam is, but it's going to look great. We are almost done. So do you do machine stitching? Do you prefer to hand bind? Sometimes I'll do it where this will be the front and I'll have the overlap on the back, and then there'll be like an extra here. Sometimes I do it where I go to the front. How do you like to do your binding? Let me know in the comments. And that is it. Now it's done. It is ready to grace your fall table, welcoming everyone to your happy place and to your home. And again, you can use this same technique and the same measurements to make any 18-inch square piece of fabric or panel image into a beautiful table topper just like this. If you make something and post it on social media, be sure to tag me. I have all my social media links below. And also be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss a tutorial.